Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Jeff Mendelson, and this is the One Big Tip podcast. My guest today is Sofia Matveyeva. A, she is the CEO and founder of Tech for Non-Techies, an educational company and consultancy. She hosts the top-rated Tech for Non-Techies podcast, which teaches non-technical professionals how to speak tech and succeed in the digital age through corporate and individual training programs. As a non technical founder, Sophia has co created apps and algorithms that have been used by thousands. She sits on the board of the University of Chicago's alumni in the UK and also contributed to the Harvard Business Review, Financial Times, The Guardian, and forums on entrepreneurship and technology. So, this is going to be an excellent conversation today. I'm really excited. Sophia, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to the show.
Jeff, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
I love the fact that you have been published in all of these different places. It sounds like you've had such a great career, and also the part about just teaching non-technical people how to speak tech, understand tech, and really just use it as a skill in order to improve themselves, not only themselves but also their company. I think is a very unique proposition for you. So, can you please tell us a little bit about who you are and what makes you so amazing?
Wonderful question. Thank you very much, Jeff. As Jeff was saying, I run a company called Tech for Non-Techies, and my aim is to help people have wonderful careers that are fulfilling financially and also really interesting and future-proof. So I started my career outside of the technology sector because I think this is what most people kind of around my age, kind of late 30s, that's what we did. So when I was graduating from college in 2005, Facebook had existed for literally a year. So when I was graduating, most of my friends were going into banking or consulting or advertising or maybe kind of some kind of government service. The tech sector wasn't really a thing we considered. And so I worked in the media, I worked in private equity, then I got my MBA at Chicago Booth. And that's when I was really thinking that, okay, I want to transition out of these traditional fields into the world of technology. And being very ambitious and probably overconfident, I ended up starting a technology startup, a retail tech company, and raised about $1 million and ended up hiring a team. So the first time I really started collaborating very practically with developers was when they were working for me. Now, the good thing, I suppose, was that nobody could fire me, but the bad thing was that I was in a situation where I really, really needed to learn. And this is when I really understood that actually there's this huge gap for business people that for business people, I didn't want to become a developer, but I had no idea how to work with a developer. And those are different skills. And the more I learned, the more I ended up seeing that actually there are a lot of people like me. So people who have always wanted to have a great career, people who are dedicated, people who are hardworking. Maybe you got an MBA, or maybe you've already invested a lot in your learning, you're very ambitious, and you're working really, really hard in your job in the business world. And then kind of the tech sector comes along and sucker punches you just unexpectedly. And then you're wondering, okay, well, what is all of this stuff about? Do I have to completely retrain? What skills do I really need to succeed in the digital age? And this is the question that I was asking myself when I was running my first technology startup, because my colleagues, the developers, would literally say words like, we're building the backend on Ruby on Rails. And I was thinking, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I was thinking, well, do I need to learn to code? What do I need to learn to do? And I started basically figuring that out by speaking to other successful people who are non-technical in tech. And that's when I really learned what you need to know. So I learned that you need to understand the core concepts rather than the skills. And what I mean by that is you need to understand what is a back end, what is a front end, like how do they interact with each other. You need to know cool words like what an API is and how you can use it as part of your business strategy. but you don't actually need to build it yourself. And this is where I think a lot of smart and ambitious people, where we go wrong, is that we think, okay, I'm going to learn all the things. I'm going to do all the things. I am never going to sleep. I'm just going to take courses and go to work. And I tried that and it doesn't work. So I don't recommend it.
What's interesting about that story is that I did it in exactly the reverse, where I was the developer. I was never a good one, right? So I could never claim to be like one of those ace programmers that never showered or anything. Like that wasn't me, right? But what happened was I would be the person who would really try to learn all this stuff. And it just seemed like every year another programming language or another concept was coming out, as soon as you learned, C++, it's like, no, wait a second, you got this new thing called Ruby on Rails. No, you should be doing it in Python. Why aren't you doing it in Visual Basic? And it's like, oh my God, would you guys please stop? Would you please just choose one? Right. And the truth of the matter is, it's like at the end, like when you go and you buy your BMW, right? Do you really care? I mean, I'm sure there are a few gearheads here, right? Who are going to be like, oh yeah, they know every little, nook and cranny of that engine. But do you really care about how great that engine is versus, like a Mercedes or whatever? Totally different technologies, but they both, at the end of the day, get you to where you need to go, right? No different than, say, a bank. Like if you bank with Wells Fargo or you bank with Bank of America, like they're both going to offer you pretty much identical services, right? And I think one of the cool things that you hit on is really just trying to understand that, okay, so I'm not going to be fingers on keyboard making these algorithms work, but as long as you understand the possibilities, what the future looks like, then you have a much better chance of A, hiring for that success, and B, actually making it happen. So I my big question here is, once you've, let's just call it, seen the light, right? Once you started to understand what the possibilities are, how did that change you as a startup founder, and then allowed you to, to have better conversations, with your team, and to create better products?
Well, I basically just became much better at my job because when I was, in my first ever position as a CEO, because as a startup founder, this is what you become, and you're completely untrained for it. And you're wondering, like, what does leadership look like? How much am I supposed to supervise? How much am I supposed to check? And especially, I think when you're non-technical and a part of your team is technical, there's this, I certainly felt this huge amount of insecurity of like, well, I don't know what they're talking about. Can I really be a good leader of people who are doing something that I don't understand? And then, I learned about syntax errors in code. And I was thinking, does that mean I have to learn to review code and find syntax errors? Because, that's going to take me a long time to figure that out. But once I figured out actually that I need to set a goal that is going to be applicable to the engineers, that's going to be applicable to the product team. So my job is to set a goal within a particular time frame. And then it is up to them to figure out how to get there. Because this is what leadership is. Let's imagine a kind of your standard boardroom where you have the CEO, the chief technology officer, chief marketing officer, you have maybe legal counsel. All of those professionals are there because they have different expertise. And the whole point of the CTO is that they can't do this chief marketing officer's role and vice versa. They are fundamentally different jobs, but they are all working towards the same goal. So maybe for that quarter, or maybe for that year, that goal is to increase revenue, or maybe it's to cut costs, or maybe it is to enter new markets. And each one of those professionals is working towards that goal, but with their own specialty and with their own brand of genius.
I love that, because the CEO of UPS, for example, doesn't fix his trucks, right? And the CEO of Best Buy, like the largest technology chain, he's probably never rung up a customer at the cash register in order to do it. And I think that's, when you say it out loud, it almost sounds like a stupid statement, like, duh, you didn't know that, right? But at the same time, it's like, well, that's how you scale, buddy. right?
Mhm.
That's how you make this happen. Like you can't just like being a startup owner, a startup founder doesn't mean that you have to be great in all of these different things, right? You just need to know how to lead. You just need to know how to make sure that you're getting all of this information together and you're rallying the troops so that they can all move towards a common goal. And like you said, it is definitely and squarely a leadership skill, right? And I think that's so important,
Sorry to
right?
interrupt. I think we have this misconception, and I certainly had this misconception, especially of tech companies, because look at the stories that we hear about tech founders in the press. It's basically two guys in a garage building something with their bare hands, or it's two guys in a dorm room building something with their bare hands. And when we think of a tech founder, we think of Mark Zuckerberg, we think of Elon Musk. And they're very successful people. They have literally changed the world. That totally makes sense. But there are also very, very successful non-technical founders of tech businesses. So let's have a look at Brian Chesky. His background was design, and it was basically selling space on his sofa bed for a design conference that started Airbnb. Let's look at Katrina Lake. She is the CEO of Stitch Fix. They had, I think, the largest IPO in the US for the year they IPO'd. Anyway, very, very successful lady, very successful company. And she started her career in management consulting, and she got an MBA. So she has this background more similar to mine than to Mark Zuckerberg's. And what I find is that now technology has actually moved on. So yes, you have deep tech companies like DeepMind, where you really do need a technical CEO, where you really do need a technical founder to actually understand what's going on. But there are a lot of businesses, kind of like Stitch Fix, which started with technology. They are still a tech company, but really their core competency is understanding their customers, creating something that their customers would want, and commercializing it. So they're kind of less bothered about being at the forefront of AI, kind of like DeepMind is, and much more about customer satisfaction, marketing, commercialization. So companies like that can be and often should be led by non-technical founders who actually understand commercialization, who understand marketing. But in order for those people to lead those companies, they can't just be, a great retail lead. They do need to understand what a data scientist does. But that's not the same thing as being a data scientist. Working with tech people and being a tech person are two different skill sets. But what I think people need to do to get inspired, but also to take relevant action, is to see how non-technical people are succeeding in the tech world, because those stories are not really being told, but there are lots and lots of those stories if you search for them.
So, what would be the first or most critical step for a digital leader who is not technical in order to stick their big toe into this world and be effective? How does that look?
So the first thing that I would recommend is basically remove choice. There is freedom in the absence of choice. What I mean by that is make some sort of public commitment to essentially learning. And I don't mean enroll for a course and put it up on Facebook, because that does not count. What I mean is, for example, you could set up a weekly meeting with your technical counterparts and literally tell them what you're working on, ask them what they're working on. Just have this be like a half an hour situation. You talk for 10 minutes, they ask you questions for 5, or and then you do the same thing with them. So they talk for 10 minutes, you ask them questions. And literally in that situation, no question is a stupid question. And what you need to remember in these situations is that both of you are equals. There is this tendency to think, oh, the tech people are geniuses and I don't know what I'm talking about, so I'm just the stupid one. No, the tech people need to learn to speak business just as much as you need to learn to speak tech. So the first thing I'll do is literally put yourself in the situation where you have to learn. Another thing I'll do is actually learn the language of technology. So this is something that I do at Tech on Techies. You could literally start listening to the Tech on Techies podcast. You'll learn a lot of the language of technology there. But remember, that's not the same thing as taking a Python course because that's doing. Whereas I'm talking about learn to speak tech. And then the third thing that I would recommend is find people who are doing what you want to be doing. Either, if you can actually get connected to them and speak to them, that's obviously the best option. But what I did right at the beginning as a non-technical founder, I would literally just Google successful non-technical founders and I would read everything about them. Now on the Tech Fun Techies podcast, I actually interview people who are non-technical, so people who don't have backgrounds in computer science, who are succeeding in tech as founders, as investors, as digital leaders, because what you need in this journey is you need two things. You actually need the information, so you need to learn how to speak tech, but you also need to see that other people that you identify with are doing it. Because I think kind of entering into this tech world can sometimes be very intimidating, because sometimes maybe you'll go to a hackathon or maybe you'll listen to a podcast and it's just going to be all abbreviations and jargon. And then that's going to make you feel like, oh my God, there's no point. I'm never going to get it. Like I'm out of here. I'm just going to do what I know. So this is why finding examples of people who've done it before, that's just going to help you keep going.
How do you feel that once someone achieves this foundational level of tech literacy, how does that help them in their business and their startup to then become successful and have better conversations? How do you see that manifesting itself?
Well, I can give you an example of a company that we all know and some of us love, Starbucks. So I recently found out that 54% of the revenue that Starbucks makes in its stores, so 54% of in-store revenue, comes from the Starbucks app. Isn't that fascinating? So literally more than half of the revenue that they're getting in their cafes comes from an app. So what does this mean for the company and what does this mean for the leadership team? Starbucks is still a coffee chain. It is not a tech company. So its main specialty is sourcing coffee and making cakes and sandwiches and also real estate management. Like this is really what it needs to do. But given that more than half of its in-store revenue comes from its app, the management team has had to understand, okay, how do you build an app? Who has to be involved in it? How do we measure success? How do we set success metrics? And also if you actually investigate why the app is so successful, the reason why it's so successful is because it's so personalized. For those of you who use the Starbucks app to get your coffee, you know that the Starbucks app knows what kind of coffee you like. Obviously, it knows your name, it knows your birthday. So on your birthday, maybe you'll get a treat. It also probably has an idea of when you are going to want to be healthy and when you want to get something sweet. So that is personalization. And that comes from AI. So what does that mean? That means that the senior management of a coffee company have had to learn about app development, user experience design and technology, personalization via AI. Now, are they still a coffee company? Yes, they are. But they've also had to have an entirely different skill set, which they probably never expected to have to learn when they were first starting to work in a tech company. So I just think this is such an example of, if you want to succeed in today's economy, I don't care what you're doing, whether you're a startup founder or a corporate leader, if you want to succeed in the economy today, you need to learn to speak tech because it's just a part of your job.
I love that you brought up the Starbucks example because I used to be there every morning, right? And I would always be fascinated by the types of specials and the sprints that they ask you to go through. Like buy 3 coffees and, within the next 3 days and you get an extra 50 stars, right? But then, I started working from home more and I have a really cool Nespresso machine. So I don't need to go out and spend $5, $6 on a coffee anymore, right? Now when I go there, I get different types of offers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I realize it's not just somebody pulling the levers, like, oh, offer them this and then offer them that. You're right. It's by AI. I recognize it. Right. But the thing is
Mm-hmm.
that it's subtle. It's
Mm-hmm.
so subtle that it's like, oh, and it makes sense. Right. It's not
Mm-hmm.
something that feels like it's shoved in your face. Like, like some kind of offer that's not related to exactly what it is that you're doing. They are always offering me special, like mocha specials. Why? Because the only thing I drink there is my double tall mocha, right? And it's
Mhm.
like, why would I change it? And you're right, the whole personalization part is just, it
It's
is
phenomenal.
it's so spot on, right?
Mhm.
It handles everything. And it's such a poignant example of what, like of what is possible, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the things that really makes this stuff really special. So let me ask you something. So pretend you're Howard Schultz, right?
Mhm.
And you need to go and, go down this uncharted path for your company. Uh, what would you like, where would you look first? I mean, it's one thing to, to tell your HR people, all right, I need 10 app developers, right? But
Mhm.
it's more than that. There are a little bit more thinking needs to happen. How would you ask a startup founder to go down this path and do it right, instead of firing on all pistons and seeing what fails and seeing what works?
Mhm. One of the biggest mistakes startup founders make is going straight to development and hiring developers, which costs a fortune, by the way, small fortune, but still, and actually forgetting the design process. So I used to think that design was about logos and beautiful things and couture, basically nothing to do with technology. And only when I started working in tech, I actually realized that there is a whole discipline called design for technology. And again, it's not just about making things. The first part of design is research. So, user research. So, the first thing that I would recommend for anybody to do is research your users, but don't just do it, don't just create a survey monkey based on the questions that you think you should ask. Like, professional designers learn how to do user research professionally. So either hire a designer or listen to some design podcasts, get some design books, learn how to do user research properly because every product is a solution to a problem. Designers know that. And whenever a product is successful, it's because they're solving a particular problem. So first work with designers to research the problem, research the users, then make a prototype, which is something that looks like an app and feels like an app, but actually doesn't have any code. So it's a much, much cheaper thing to make because yes, you will need to work with a designer. You might need to hire somebody to work with you part-time, but a designer, one designer part-time or one designer for a design sprint for a week is much cheaper than getting a back-end and a front-end developer. So you iterate your research, you make a prototype then you test that prototype, you iterate. Only when the prototype has been tested, only when you actually have a prototype of, a, of a very simple product, not an equivalent of Facebook now with all sorts of features, a very, very simple, bare minimum product, can you work with developers? And I find that a lot of companies, a lot of corporates or startups just think, I've got this idea, let's hire developers and move ahead. And that always ends up being a phenomenal waste of money.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. It's actually really true. Like when you try to use the crowbar method. That's what I call it. Like when you just try to bang something into shape, and it's just no. I mean, it's so much easier to make it look beautiful from the start instead of just trying to make it work afterwards. And you see so many different examples of that. Like in different technologies. And like I can spot it now, simply because I was in that type of role. It's like, yeah, this is an afterthought. No, this was well thought out.
Mhm.
And you could, by going to your example with the Starbucks app, you're right. This was very well thought out from the beginning, and it rightfully so became more than half of their revenue, because that's what everyone had. It's a perfect addition to what everyone already had before they even arrive in the stores. So
Well, this is why I find that consumer companies tend to basically have better design than B2B companies. And the reason is that the further you move away from competition, the worse the design gets. So, for example, if Starbucks had a terrible app that nobody could work out how to use, realistically, do you have other coffee shops around that you could go to? Like, there are a lot, like, you can get coffee. Coffee is a commodity product. The app is one of the things that gets you to come back to Starbucks as opposed to go to all of the other coffee shops you could get to. But if your company, you imagine you work in a corporate and your company has bought some sort of software and you all have to use it and you hate it, but you have this contract, like you are using it for the next 2 years, no matter how much you cry. But then also, let's take it to the extreme. Tax software. So when you actually have to file your taxes, is it a pleasant and easy process? Like, I'm just going to fill that out in an hour and go skip into the sunset? No, like it makes you.
In their defense, they tried their best to make it a pleasant experience, but yeah, it still sucks
It
bad.
still sucks. But the thing is, if you don't do it, what will happen to you? You'll get arrested. You'll have to pay a fine. So basically, you have no choice. So like there is no competition because your only competition is really becoming a fugitive. So like you deal with this software, you hire somebody to do it for you, or you become a fugitive. That's not a realistic choice for most people. Not like Starbucks versus just another coffee shop. So I find that if you work in innovation, you work in digital transformation, or you want to be a startup founder, and you really want to understand design, you want to find good design, look at the consumer companies, because that's where design is super, super competitive, and that's where it really matters. The further you move away, basically the higher the switching cost, the worse the design is.
Wow, very poignant. Thank you so much for sharing that. Sophia, where can people learn more about your company and how can they reach out to you directly?
I would love for you to reach out to me directly. So, first of all, listen to the Tech for Non-Techies podcast. There are lots of useful lessons and useful examples there that you can get for free. Also, if you go to the Tech for Non-Techies website, you will get my free guide to the top 10 concepts in technology that non-technical professionals need to know. So I mentioned some of them today, like API, backend, front-end, and there are even pictures, so it's very easy to follow. So just go to techfornontechies.co. And if you want to reach out to me directly, just find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. That's Sophia Matveyeva.
Sophia, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a lovely discussion, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us about this. It's been fascinating.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I have really enjoyed